Hello everyone, welcome to another edition of this series entitled Capitalism, Noir and the Disappearance of Present Time. If you haven't done so already, please check out episode 1 and 2 of this series, where after introducing the key concepts and then offering a critique of Mark Fisher's book Ghost of My Life, which claims that our grasp of the future is disappearing, I discussed the imminent collapse of capitalism with the rise of alternative economic models, a collapse comparable to film noir with the arrival of color in the history of cinema. In conclusion, I speculated that this system has not yet imploded because the owners of capitalist property are stifling its detractors with divide and conquer tactics. So in a nutshell, that's the story so far. And on an intellectual level, many authors, like Mark Fisher, are distracting us, telling us that the future is eroding when it's actually our ability to act in the present which has been taken away from us as we have become time poor. And now, Francis Fukuyama comes to similar conclusions than Fisher in a previous episode, but in his case, I find Fukuyama is overreacting to the geopolitical turmoil resulting from the 1989 collapse of the Soviet Union. In his 1992 book, The End of History and the Last Man, Fukuyama proclaimed that there was no longer any need for historical chronology since the US were no longer locked into a Cold War scenario with an evenly matched superpower, the USSR, a nation capable of staging nuclear war games against America, and therefore it was game over for history, because history for Fukuyama mainly consisted in a recording of ongoing sequences of conflicts between warring factions. And now that the US and its allies have effectively won the Cold War, so by extension free market capitalism alongside liberal democracy also won against communism, and now that this free market is the last system standing, no battles are expecting in the future beyond local skirmishes, and so there's no use writing in history logs anymore. According to Fukuyama, the future has ended because from 1989 onwards, history was expecting to become continuous, uninterrupted, and unchallenged by new contenders of world domination. The West had won. And so this seemed to be the new status quo in 1990, in this decade following the fall of the Berlin Wall and before 9/11, before the rise of asymmetrical warfare against terrorism. Fukuyama signaled the end of incremental changes in human history, which resonated with Fisher's vision of a foreclosed future. To me again, this all sounded like an act of self-blindness, akin to Lyotard's postmodern mistake to confuse the statement, "There's no new history," and "I see no history." And like Oedipus blinding himself to deny his own fate, the refusal to accept upcoming changes often results in making those changes come sooner and stronger, and as we are seeing now today in 2021 with climate denial. But in hindsight, at the close of the 20th century, Fukuyama did not anticipate the rise of Islam as a competing ideology to market liberalism or China as a competing economy. And more importantly, he was not able to recognize liberal democracy and capitalism as two separate entities. Interestingly though, Slavoj Žižek argued in his 2011 book Living in the End Times that China would be successful at practicing capitalism without any need for democratic levers. But inversely, Žižek's observation allowed me to now go the other way and claim that democratic systems can also function without capitalist incentives. Pushing these ideas a bit further, Yuval Noah Harari, in his 2015 opus Hominids, he speaks of this transition into a new era of humanism that has gotten rid of famine, disease, and war, mainly thanks to advances in agriculture, medicine, and diplomacy. Of course, this should be celebrated for Harari, but on the flip side, as famine, disease and war also mark time, he feels their steady decline will simultaneously erase the usual traces of human history. Moreover, Harari feels that recent advances in technology and other forms of progress will not necessarily increase human agency. He claims that artificial intelligence and other smart machines will come to serve their own exclusive benefits, leaving humans on the sidelines of what is left of history. And a final twist, Harari welcomes this fate, arguing that humans hold no claim of tenure as the dominant species on Earth. Let's remember this last statement, as Harari notes that every day billions of people decide to grant their smartphones a bit more control over their lives, or try a new and more effective antidepressant drug. In pursuit of health, happiness and power, humans will gradually change one of their features, then another, until they will no longer be human. Well, perhaps there is some truth in this statement, which I'll unpack in a minute, but on first impressions, I hope you can agree with me that this seems ludicrous to think that the decline of human species and the rise of techno-beings is caused directly by the end of human wars, famine and disease. Correlation does not mean causation. And by the way, as far as I can tell by plainly looking at the news, there is still plenty of wars in Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen, ongoing famine in South Sudan, Somalia, and Nigeria, and the ones are often caused by the others. Famine is often caused by war, and in the face of the ongoing droughts, flooding, and fires ensuing from climate change, can we still paint the world after 2020 as one free of disease? I mean, as I said earlier, and in the previous episodes, what seems a common mistake with all the above authors is that they appear to still view the world as divided between self-contained East and West hemispheres and global North and South. So yes, of course, within the limited regions of developed countries, there might be less illnesses and war occurring, but overall, on a planetary scale, I wager that there are about the same tallies of famine and disease as before, but that they've now been scattered to different regions. And intuitively, I'm guessing that conflicts have not just moved around or changed in numbers, they've also changed in kind. If to the number of conventional wars between nations we add asymmetrical wars against terrorist factions, if we also add domestic conflicts between the now militarized police and protesters across the world engage in a political awakening, then it might be the case that the number of conflicts have gone up in the world, not down. And the same goes for culture. It hasn't disappeared, it just diversified and moved around, embracing other parts of the world. This is exactly like saying that manufacturing is no longer a driving force in the economy. That may be the case for isolated regions like USA and Europe. It's certainly not the case for China, India, Mexico, or Vietnam. China's quasi-monopoly over the world's manufacturing of commodities is a principal factor for its rise as a new superpower. Here, as with history, we can recognize the same pattern of confusing no industry and a relocating of industry, and a confusion between no culture and relocated cultures and diversified cultures. In the case of Fukuyama, it feels like the rise of geography in a sense of a decentralized world economy. This has been confused with the end of history. Harari's thesis also seems muddled, using a sort of metonymic confusion between tools and users when talking about humans losing control to technology. He is definitely blurring the line between the managers of technology and technology itself. But let's keep calm. Technology is not on its own about to take control of human societies. Harari is just using a convenient twist of logic to de-responsibilize the human agents, the proprietors of technology firms that are designing technology to better control other humans, namely the renters of technology, people paying recurring fees for software updates and hardware upgrades. So going back to Harari's previous quote, with such notions in mind, we can now link technologies with other strategies in the longer history of capitalism and class struggle. In this context, Harari's previous quote appears to more accurately describe today's human condition, even if reaching a much more sinister outcome. Every day, millions of renters decide to grant to proprietors a bit more control over their lives, and so on and so on. You get the picture. But on a more positive note, we can flip another argument by Harari to remind ourselves that proprietors hold no claim of tenure as a dominant class in society. A great example to highlight this mix between technology and its managers is Deep Blue, the chess-playing computer pitted against the world champion at the time, Garry Kimovich Kasparov, in 1996. This chess match was portrayed as one between man and machine, where in fact it was between one unassisted human, Kasparov, and a team of human programmers and chess experts assisted by a high-performance computer. So in effect, the match was one of man against other men hiding behind technology. To recap, my thesis so far is that history and culture and conflicts and other phenomena are not disappearing, they're just migrating to new regions like the bulk of manufacturing, which moved to China. Furthermore, technology, medicine, or the economy in general are not sentient beings or singularities, but often tools for humans to mobilize other humans. And the same goes for capitalism. It's not in essence an autonomous economic mechanism, but at its core, merely a contingent of proprietors willingly extracting money and time from renters. And as it was said of other contingents, capitalism holds no legitimate claim of tenure as the final world order on this planet. In opposition to the views of Fisher, Fukuyama, and Harari, which I summarized before as advocates of the disappearance of the future, I argue that it is in fact the present that is disappearing, or more precisely, it is postponed, forever procrastinated, in our capacity to process change with immediate action. We're now too busy and too distracted to do that. But like computers against chess players, this scarcity of the present is not spontaneously occurring, it's not happening by itself, but actively orchestrated by people and institutions in power to keep capitalism from imploding like film noir did with the emergence of color. Otherwise, more efficient and inclusive social contracts would flourish, rising to the fore more quickly, such as those promoting sharing and caring. But for now, under conditions of the postponed present, the only ventures that are allowed to succeed to mainstream consciousness are those promoting profit and growth, since capitalism is still acting as a gatekeeper of the global economy via the IMF, the World Bank, and similar institutions. But as less and less growth is possible in a world of finite resources and labor power, the hegemonic hold of capitalism continues to decline, even if at a slower pace than expected. And to conclude this episode, I will propose the idea that the surest sign of capitalism's decline is this confusion that authors like Fisher, Fukuyama, and Harari have shown, this confusion between the decline of history, culture, and the decline of capitalism as a whole. Given that capitalism is still acting as a gatekeeper of social changes, it only seems natural for such authors to confusingly conclude that history and culture and the future are eroding, when in fact, as more and more historical and cultural events that contradict the narrative of growth, as these events do not pass the gates of capitalism and do not enter mainstream consciousness, it appears that fewer substantial events are occurring, when it is actually the gates of capitalism which are closing on themselves, becoming increasingly intolerant of new events, showing alternatives to growth, and never making it to mainstream media. So as a result, it is the entire scope of the content, the stuff, the substance of capitalism, which is now waning and eventually imploding. And it is happening, but just in slow motion. Okay, that's all I will say in this video, and in the next upcoming episode, I will, instead of exposing the problematic thoughts of other authors, I'll propose my own solutions to the predicament of capitalism noir and the disappearance of the present. But unfortunately for today, I've run out of time. So if you want to watch out for upcoming episodes of this series, please like and subscribe, and I can reach out and keep you posted on when the next video will be online. And in the meantime, don't hesitate to tell me what you think of the ideas I've put forward so far in the comments below. And in the meantime, I hope to see you soon, and thanks for watching.